We will learn from what the title has said. We have sections on preparations and then section on security, which is in line with the theme of this workshop. So under the key preparation activities, we will look at development of election planning tools, expansion of voter access to polling units, permanent voters cards, replacement of smart card reader with the pinpoint as far as election is concerned. Then we will now be looking at replacement of the card, deployment of functional behavior, results management systems, stakeholder engagement, and so these are just the outlines. I don't think we should not waste time on that outlines. What is the structure of the presentation? Essentially, like I said, we have part one that deals with preparation for the 2023 general elections, where activities, programs, processes, and infrastructure will be discussed. Part two will deal with security challenges in line with the theme of the workshop, and of course, part three will normally be recommendation and conclusion. We start by the dates and then the magnitudes of the 2023 general election. INEC released its timetable and schedule of activities for the 2023 general election on Saturday, 26th February 2022, which served the notice for the commencement of preparation for the election. The election will take place, there are basically two elections. The presidential and national election will hold on Saturday, 25th February 2023. Houses of Assembly election will hold 2 weeks later on Saturday, 11th March 2023. The governorship election will not take place in the 36 states. The reason being that 8 out of the 36 are off-cycle elections, which arose because of litigations, court orders, and other things, so they are no longer holding within the same national election framework. Now, process of election are going to take place nationwide, and we'll give some little information, basic statistics to show the extent or the coverage of the elections. We see the landmass of Nigeria is 923,768 kilometers. Estimated population of registered voters, as we are talking now, is 95 million. We'll be a bit above it. This depends on how the severe exercise ends. How many constituencies? There will be 1,419 constituencies in which these elections will take place. And in these constituencies across the country, we have 176,846 polling units. These polling units are spread in 8,809 electoral wards. We have the presidential election taking place in the 37, because we have 36 plus FCT states within the country, and local government area and stroke area council 774. So this is the extent to this thing. Now, we compare this with some of the situation in West Africa, with the estimated voter population of 95 million. Nigeria has more than 60% of the estimated 157.6 million registered voters in Africa. Like the chairman will always say, if we were to be election in Nigeria will be as if you are conducting election in 14 of the 15 countries within the West Africa. In fact, we are more than that because their population put together is less than that. And with the 176,846 polling units, Nigeria has about 54.6% of the estimated 323,709 polling units in West Africa. And like the chairman will always say, like the chairman will always say, when you look at this compared to West African countries, and you add to this the fact that almost everything required, infrastructure required for election, has to be provided by the election management body, by INEC. What do we mean by almost all? Because of our poor situation of electricity in the country, in almost every ward, all of our LGS, where coalitions will be, we have to provide generators. At the RAC Center, where the election officials, especially the youths, the NU and the NYSC, and of course our men, that means the security agencies, who spend a night over there, water has to be provided. INEC has to provide that water. So things like this make the issue of conducting election in Nigeria a very, very huge undertaking. Now, the philosophy in INEC is that preparation for election starts immediately after the day of the election. What do we mean by that? Immediately after the election and declaration of results everywhere, the first thing that we try to do is to do what we call the reverse logistics, where all the election materials that are not consumable, ones that are left, are supposed to be returned and kept for purposes of off-cycle, supplementary elections, and all these things. So from there, we've started planning for other elections. So as soon as the 2019 election was over, the commission started looking at the processes. We also do the briefings for main organizations, foreign observers, foreign nations, CSOs, all come in to give us their own view on how they saw the elections. What are the positive sides of the election? What are the challenges in the elections and all this? And they, of course, expect that once these debriefings are done, there are lessons that will be learned. And you don't learn lessons just simply just to keep them in your head. You learn lessons to improve on what you are doing. So after the 2019 election, the review of the election was done, and so many, about 178 recommendations came out of that review. So some of the recommendations we have broken them into two. Some are administrative, which we can do. The other ones are legislative, which we can't do on our own. We must do in the zone with the National Assembly and all this. So the administrative reviews from the 2019 general elections, that some of the ones that we consider major are that we had to create gender and inclusivity department to promote then gender mainstreaming and enhance the engagement and participation of marginalized section of the society. We know that election, it is expected to cater for every sector of the society. If it doesn't do that, then it is not free and fair, because it means that a segment of the society has not been given the opportunity to do that. So, from most of our activities and some of the recommendations, the observations were that we needed to create this department in order to accommodate, give women more participation, the PWDs, disabled persons, and other I don't want to use the word segregated or neglected section of the society. So a department was created so that these things will be addressed. And then arising from a lot of cases of litigations and all these things, it also the Department of Litigation and Prosecution was also created, because as when we go through, we realize that INEC is one of the most involved agency as far as court cases is concerned in this country. Maybe we rank number one as far as that is concerned. Like I said earlier, there is the issue of auditing non-sensitive election materials. We have the sensitive one, ballot papers, and all, and the equipment like the beavers, and these are all sensitive. So we do this audit. The ones that we could use, maps and all these things, we keep them so that they can be used. The ones that cannot be used nationwide, we now become aware of the gap, what we need to acquire when we are going for the next election. So these are then the legal ones are essentially no, we'll continue with the administrative ones. We have to before up to from 2003 up to 2019, we always had problem of access to polling units. What do you mean by access to polling units? Subsequently, I will give more details. But the issue arose because there used to be a lot of congestion in polling units. And when you have congestion in polling units, so many things come up that create an environment that makes the election not conducive. We'll come to this sector that will deal with that. The conduct of training, refresher training and capacity building for our staff. And when we talk about our staff here, we are talking about it in the larger sense, because we have the permanent staff and we have the ad hoc staff. And the ad hoc staff are about over 1 million. So all this, we now have to build capacity for this staff. Then the preparation for budget. The election has to be financed, so you have to do the budget. And then we have already made some publications that. Now, what about the legal aspect of this? All were agreed by after the 2019 election that there are so many provisions in the 2010 Electoral Act that do not allow for conduct of election as would have loved, and therefore there was the need to amend some of the provisions, include some provisions, so that the electoral laws governing the elections will be improved. Of course, the Commission, CSOs, and other stakeholders within the country did all they could to push for the new Electoral Act, which was just signed, the 2022 Electoral Act. and is some of the key provisions that arose from the 2022 Electoral Act are the ones I'm listing here. First is the early notice of election. And the relevant section is section 28.1. And this provides that notice of elections be published not later than 360 days before the day appointed for the elections. Now, the important impact of this, the 2010 Electoral Act provided for 90 days, but this one provided for 360 days. And that's why we have now started this exercise now. This now gives us ample time to address challenges. And for this particular workshop, this provision has been extremely useful. This battery thing, your battery keeps on. What is happening? Eh? Okay, give me mine. Use mine. Bring mine. If you can project, I hope the projecting this thing is there. Eh? If maybe your battery has problem. in each of the polling units across the country. And the intention there is for members of the public to go and look at that list, and if they have anything they observe with respect to any listing, they can raise that, and the person will now be listened. So we say display. We display the list of candidates for claims and objections to be made. Then the big one, which is the use of bimodal voter accreditation system for accreditation. These sections 47, 1, 2, 3, and section 52 now gives the legal backing for use of beavers in the conduct of the election. Before then, what we were doing is to pilot using this technological equipment. But now it has legal backing for us to do that. More will be said about beavers next. Then electronic collation and transmission of election results. The same sections 47 to 52, 65, 62, 2, and 65. All these give legal backing for transmission, or is it transfer, of results. Again, it is important to draw attention to something here. Please, this, of course, the commission can go ahead to do electronic voting based on the provisions, but the commission for the 2023 is not thinking of electronic voting. Electronic voting is different from transmission of results and basically. And again, the provisions is not essentially saying that we do away with the former manual system. No, that's not what this provision is talking about. The provision gives dual transmission. That's why you say all transfer of results. Those who have been involved in the process of election will know that essentially there is the HCA series form at the polling unit that where after we do the counting, we record results. That is the first form where results are recorded after voting has been completed. That will be signed by the presiding officer. Copies will be given to the police. The commission will keep its own copies. Agents of the political parties will have those listings. Before, those are what we do, and then the POs will take their own copy to the collation center, which will now be used for collation. Now, as soon as the election counting is over and the results recorded on it is the presiding officer, once it is fully signed by the presiding officer, political party agents, police, once it's fully signed, then the first thing he does is to scan it using the beavers and upload it to the portal. Now, what advantage this has is that you will now have record of that result kept electronically. But having done that, the former procedure where the presiding officer, accompanied by security agents, will take it to the collation center still stands. He has to still take this to the collation center. At the collation center, before the collation officer starts working on that, he has to make sure that what is brought to him, which is the physical result, tallies with what was transmitted electronically. Now, the electronic transmission, we say scan, is a picture that is taken. So it is not the figures that are transferred, it's the picture of the distance that is transferred. Yeah, of the the result sheet. Yes. Now this makes it more difficult for people to tamper with that. And if they don't tally, then the coalition officer will query the SPO what happened to this result. But the positive part of it is that this now has eliminated the process, the problem of people relaying these things to take away the results and write the results and then take a different result. So these are some of the important things with this electronic system. So I don't want to waste a lot of time on this issue of this. Of course, again, there is another provision that is very, very important, section 51.2, where we now, overvoting is now decided on the basis of accredited voters, not registered voters. For those who are familiar with the process, you'll see the issue. When the voters come to the polling unit and vote, the beavers will record each person that has voted appropriately and clear. And by the time the counting is done, then the number of this votes, the valid votes, the spoiled votes, and all this is must tally with the result, as provided. If it does not tally, there is one more than what is that expression, then you cancel that result. Now, if that result is cancelled, it has some implication in the overall declaration of result, because if you cancel results in polling units, it's different polling units. By the time you want to do declaration, you have to look at the margin between the first, the one at the top, and the second person, and then compare that with the number of before registered voters. But the problem we've always had is that you have large number of registered voters, but you have very poor attendance at the during the polling for polling unit. The voter turnout is very poor, and when you start basing that cancellation on the registered voters, you continue having what we have, the problem of inconclusive elections. But this time, it's those who came and are accredited by the beavers will now determine some of this. So that's a really good provision. Then the commission also now has powers under section 65 to to review the declaration made by the collation and declaration officer. So if a returning officer makes a declaration under two conditions: one, under duress. We have had situation where people use gun on the returning officer and ask him to declare them. And once he does that declaration, nobody changes that until the court, you go to the court. So there will, many political actors are aware of that. So they will use duress to force the returning officer to make a declaration, and then they go to court and then this. So with this new provision now, INEC can review within 7 days such. So if the returning officer said that I did this return under duress, so within 7 days, INEC will look at that and then review that. In other words, we can now recreate it and then check the results, previous results according to the collation across, and then we can change that. Or alternatively, if the returning officer does what is wrong for whatever reason, maybe there is some interest, because of that interest, this is what the result said, but he decides to make a declaration because he knows once his declaration is done, it is court that will done. But even in such circumstances, INEC can review that also. So this is also very good provisions that this is. Yeah, and then the other one is the section 54, which provides INEC with latitude to see that disabled people and people with special needs are appropriately catered for. Now, we just move. The next aspect of it, this is now the introduction aspect of it. The next aspect is what are the preparations that INEC has done so far. You look at this from two perspectives, programs and materials, basically. Now, the first, of course, in the preparation is development of election planning tools. What are the election planning tools? The election planning tools for INEC are two. The 2020. This is a copy of the plan. Of course, it was presented to the public, but that is a copy for the 2023 election is there. Then we have what we